Question 13. Therapist. Cognitive psychotherapy focuses on changing a patient's conscious beliefs. Thus, cognitive psychotherapy is likely to be more effective at helping patients overcome psychological problems than are forms of psychotherapy that focus on changing unconscious beliefs and desires, since only conscious beliefs are under the patient's direct conscious control. So, argument or facts, clearly we have an argument, structure, indicator of thus, the conclusion being that cognitive psychotherapy is likely to be more effective at helping patients overcome psychological problems than are forms of psychotherapy that focus on changing unconscious beliefs and desires. And how do we know that? Well, first it tells us that cognitive psychotherapy focuses on changing a patient's conscious beliefs, and only conscious beliefs are under a patient's direct conscious control. And again, we know only introduces necessary, so if you are under a patient's direct conscious control, then you are a conscious belief. If you are not a conscious belief, you are not under the patient's direct conscious control. And you notice it's saying that because cognitive psychotherapy is focusing on changing a patient's conscious belief, and these conscious beliefs are the only beliefs that are under a patient's direct conscious control, they're going to be more effective than other forms of psychotherapy that focus on changing unconscious beliefs and desires. And so now that we have a clear understanding of this argument, we'll proceed to the question stem. Which one of the following, if true, would most strengthen the therapist's argument? Most strengthen, we have a regular strengthen question. So, looking at A, psychological problems are frequently caused by unconscious beliefs that could be changed with the aid of psychotherapy. And if anything, you notice A would weaken this argument that cognitive psychotherapy is more effective than other forms that focus on changing unconscious beliefs. So A is out. B, it is difficult for any form of psychotherapy to be effective without focusing on mental states that are under the patient's direct conscious control. And does that strengthen this argument? And you notice that it clearly does. By saying it's difficult for any form to be effective without focusing on mental states that are under the patient's direct conscious control, we know without introduces necessary. So focusing on mental states under patient's direct conscious control. Difficult to be effective, so then we negate that. Not difficult to be effective, we'll just say effective. Because again, we know without introduces necessary, and the negation of the other part of the statement will be sufficient. The contrapositive, if you do not focus on mental states under the patient's direct conscious control, then it will be difficult for you to be effective. And you notice that since these other forms of psychotherapy focus on changing unconscious beliefs, and we know unconscious beliefs, the contrapositive of the last statement tells us that unconscious beliefs are not on the patient's direct conscious control. So therefore, if they're not under the patient's direct conscious control, unlikely to be effective or difficult to be effective, which clearly strengthens this argument. So B would be the correct answer. And again, strengthens by tying in this idea of focusing on conscious beliefs that are under the patient's direct conscious control somehow makes cognitive psychotherapy more effective. B tells us that if you don't focus on things under the patient's direct conscious control, it's difficult for you to be effective. So B strengthens the argument. But again, just making sure, checking C, cognitive psychotherapy is the only form of psychotherapy that focuses primarily on changing the patient's conscious beliefs. And again, that is completely irrelevant because this argument is not about cognitive psychotherapy versus all other forms of psychotherapy. It is that cognitive psychotherapy is more effective than are forms of psychotherapy that focus on challenging unconscious beliefs and desires. So we are not comparing cognitive psychotherapy to all psychotherapy. So C is completely irrelevant. C is out. D, no form of psychotherapy that focuses on changing the patient's unconscious beliefs and desires can be effective unless it also helps change beliefs that are under the patient's direct conscious control. And again, you notice that is not going to help us. And the problem with D, okay, fine, no form of psychotherapy that focuses on changing the patient's unconscious beliefs and desires can be effective unless it also helps change beliefs that are under the patient's direct conscious control. But that doesn't strengthen that cognitive psychotherapy is more effective at helping patients overcome psychological problems than are forms of psychotherapy that focus on changing unconscious beliefs and desires. It doesn't help us. We don't know if cognitive psychotherapy focusing on conscious beliefs is more effective. The only thing D tells us is that focusing on unconscious beliefs, you're also going to have to focus on conscious beliefs, but doesn't help us in terms of comparing cognitive psychotherapy to forms of therapy that focus on changing unconscious beliefs. And then lastly, E, all of a patient's conscious beliefs are under the patient's conscious control, but other psychological states cannot be controlled effectively without the aid of psychotherapy. And again, without the aid of psychotherapy, that's what we're talking about. The issue is what kind of psychotherapy, though, cognitive versus other forms. So E does not strengthen, completely irrelevant, and E would be eliminated.